Okay, we're going live, all right?
Right.
2 from verses 31 to 34 reads as follows. Now it came to pass in the 37th year of the captivity of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 25th day of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and brought him out of prison. And he spoke kindly to him and gave him a more prominent seat than those of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim changed from his prison garments, and he ate bread regularly before the king all the days of his life. And as for his provisions, there was a regular ration given him by the king of Babylon, a portion for each day, until the day of his death, all the days of his life. A very good morning to you. It is 7 a.m. It's the 30th of September. It's Monday morning. Terence Martin and myself, Theophilus van Rensburg Linster, meet every single morning, Monday through to Friday, here on the Fifth Connection, strengthening your and our ability to see through the maze of life by focusing on the Word of God. Not just that, finding very specific and practical ways to make real the kind of challenges that God provides in His Word for us. Some of it is encouragement, and some of it is affording something of a different or a new lease on life. We'll hear a little bit more from you on that, Terry. Good morning to you, brother.
Good morning, Theo. Good morning, listeners.
We are thankful that you are joining with us here. God bless you as we return in about 60 seconds. Terry, I think maybe a little bit on the sound thing. I'm not so sure if you're coming through the computer sound instead of the roadcaster. As I said, good morning to you, Terry. You were there with us?
I am, yeah.
Got it. There you are. That sounds terrific. Thank you very much for taking us through these few minutes together, Terry. Thank you.
It was in 2023 that a politician by the name of Peter Groenewald made a very interesting observation, and he said that the remission that President Ramaphosa approved former President Jacob Zuma demonstrates his dishonesty regarding the matter, and he goes into quite some detail as a Freedom Front Plus politician to show that in his discussion with the president, at that point, the president wasn't willing to play his hand, that eventually he would grant Jacob Zuma an early release on parole for a so-called medical condition. And if that were to fail, of course, an early release would be on the cards. It was soon after that that about 9,000 criminals' sentences was remitted, 9,000, and all to accommodate one person, which just shows how serious our situation in this country is, even at the justice level. But what I want us to focus on this morning is the whole issue of brand new opportunities. We call them second chances. But for one who has contact with base reality, one who has contact with the transcendent God of the universe, the great I am, it is quite a different way of viewing second chances, because second chances are, in fact, brand new opportunities of what's going to unfold or what is unfolding. And at the end of Jeremiah, in the last few verses, after 52, 51 actually, strenuous chapters, where in Jeremiah's journal he is tracking the history of the people of God through the thick and thin, through the ebb and through the flow of their life, because he's the credible witness that's speaking for God in this very difficult context of God planting and God plucking up. So in chapter 1, you have the call of the prophet. In chapter 2 to 45, you have the demise of the covenant culture. Why is it that God literally breaks the back of this nation? That this culture does not survive? What are the reasons for that? Well, episode after episode in these stories, chapter by chapter, the story writer, the journal entries have to do with why this covenant culture is in the process of crumbling and will finally crumble. And then the shift comes in chapter 46 to 49, because 9 ancient cultures that surround Israel are culpable as well. They have been giving Israel grief throughout history, and they are literally enemies of Israel. And so one of the things that we've done across these 10 messages, and this morning is the 11th one, is shown that fractals are iterative patterns. They are infinitely iterative. A fractal has to do with the pattern of the microcosm is the same pattern for the macrocosm. What happens in miniature happens in a macro kind of way. And so a fern would be fractal. We talk about the fractal fern. And fractals have to do with death, life, death, resurrection, order, disorder, and reorder. And throughout the 52 chapters, you see this pattern all over the place. Israel must die in order to rise. Israel's enemies must die, and some of them never to rise. God is still in control, sovereignly in control over what is happening. And so these 9 ancient cultures also suffer. And then in 50 to 51, there is talk of the demise of the colonial culture. The great colonial culture of the day was Babylon, and she would ultimately fall. And now in chapter 52, the city and the sacred site, which is Jerusalem, and its citizens will experience the brunt of God's judgment, as the chapter ends with a note of the fall of Jerusalem. But it's really in the midst of all of this confusion, amidst all of the demise of this culture, that there's a glimmer of hope, which really presents again the profile of order that is going to rise. And it comes right at the end of chapter 52, which is really an appendix, because if you look at the last verse of chapter 51, it says right in the last verse that this is the end of the words of the prophet Jeremiah, right? These are the last words. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. And then comes this appendix about the fall of Jerusalem, and it's done in review. But it's quite significant now that the 2 principles that arise in the last couple of verses, going from verse 31 to verse 34, first of all has to do with remission and release. Secondly, release. Firstly, remission and then release. What's remission about? Remission is about a lessening or a softening of the penalty. What was really to be a long prison term for the former president becomes an early parole situation because of health conditions, as it is recorded news-wise. But remission brings release in verse 31. This king comes to power, and his name is Jehoiachin or Jehoiakim. Jehoiachin comes to power, and it says, now it came to pass in verse 31, in the 37th year of the captivity, Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 50th day of the month, something very significant is going to happen. He comes to power at 18 years of age. Jehoiachin does. And he reigns for about 100 days. And of course, he's in exile for about 37 years. And he's at the point where you get past the scratching on the wall of your cell, trying to record things, trying to count the days. And something very significant happens to him in verse 31. It says, Evil Merodach, the king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, lifted up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, and brought him out of prison. Now, what a crazy thing is happening here. The people of God go into exile, and the exile is to be 70 long years. And he, of course, is exiled for 37 years. But here, in the first year of the reign of evil Merodach, king of Babylon, the king is released. His sentence is remitted. And what happens in this remittance? Well, his release brings about restoration. The remission brings release, and his release brings about a high degree of restoration. Verse 32. And he, evil Merodach, spoke kindly to him. Who's him? Jehoiachin. And gave him a more prominent seat than those of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin changed from his prison garments. The orange uniforms are substituted for something different. The diet changes, and he ate bread regularly before the king for how long? All the days of his life. Here is a favorable fate, a favorable outcome, a second chance. But this second chance is a glimpse of what a brand new opportunity will look like. Verse 34 says, and as for his provisions, there was a regular ration given him by the king of Babylon, a portion for each day until the day of his death, all the days of his life. Watch first of all the compassion shown to him. He's released. His wardrobe changes. So does his diet. And he's elevated to a position above actually the kings of Babylon. So there's elevation in the midst of compassion, but there's also provision. The king's provision for this one in exile. Watch how in the midst of the great chaos that the nation is experiencing, the disorder and the discomfort, more than the discomfort, the persecution of what exile brings. It is their home away from home. The people of God are vomited off of the land. The land gives them up, and they go into exile for 70 years. What a hard pill to swallow. And yet, in the midst of that, there comes a time when the king, his sentence is remitted, he's released, and is restored to a position that is an elevated one. And he's provided for. Because you see, child of God, this is how God operates. In the midst of great disorder in our lives, God can provide calm in the midst of the storm. Calm in the midst of the storm. Whenever you go around Chapman's Peak, now Chapman's Peak was both my wife and I, our famous journey before we had our first child. We got married, and every Friday night it was date night, and I would take her around the peninsula, and we would go from Camps Bay all around the peninsula, all the way around Simonstown, and come back through Fishhook and make our way home. It was every Friday until she was heavily pregnant. That was our date. And something about going along the coast is the astounding scenery as the sun sets. And as you get around a little place called Kommetjie, it's a little basin, a Kommetjie, you would see a lighthouse. And this lighthouse would tower on the coastline, because you see, a lighthouse is like that. It provides direction, and it provides focus in the midst of high storms, because it would serve as a signal, as a beacon to the boats that are out in the tempest. And God is like that. God somehow is able to make a way in the midst of life when there seems to be no way. And that's the anchor that is thrown out to the people of God here, as this book ends with this fractal idea that in the midst of disorder, there's a smidgen of order. In the midst of confusion, God is the stability that can give us calm, tranquility, and direction. And so, as you face Monday morning, it's not going to be without its challenges of traffic, of challenges in the workspace, in the workplace, of challenges and consternation in your own life. He's the one who is our order and brings order into our very chaotic world. May you experience a new lease on life today in the midst of the challenges that you face. Back to you, Theo.
Thank you, Terry. Or almost in the words of that song that we're just about to play, bringing beauty out of the ashes. For those of you who joined us this morning on this particular Monday morning, 30th of September, we thank you so very, very much, Terry. Thank you so very much for sharing this enormous encouragement of light in the midst of deep darkness. We appreciate that, brother. You yourself have a wonderful day and a splendid week.
I will see you, and thank you for your listening and the listeners.